Don't know if you've heard, but the elections for this fall, the 2022 midterms, are the single most important elections of our lifetimes. Democracy itself hangs in the very balance. And you know it's true because we haven't heard that before in any election. Ever. This is the first time ever that democracy itself is hung in the balance. The most important election of our lifetimes. We never heard that before. Except that's exactly what we always hear. Every election. And of course, to me, it's a perverted joke. Democracy hangs in the balance. What democracy? We've been here for 500 years. We haven't had democracy for a single minute of a single day. So what democracy are they talking about? This country is a white supremacist ethno-state. Can't even claim to be a republic. Now, we've been trying hard as we can to turn it into a democracy, but everybody else has been fighting against us. So if they want to say that the United States actually turning into a democracy might be on the ballot, that's fine, but I don't see anybody who's championing that. I see more of the same old status quo. You have to already believe that the United States is a democracy if you want to go along with their claptrap, and we don't because we're not stupid. Now, the white supremacists on the left, calling themselves Democrats, they've been trying to find a way to get black people excited over nothing. And that's the reason why you've had this nonsense about Ketanji Brown being nominated to the Supreme Court. Black folks are happy about it, or so the white media says. They said, oh, black folks have support for the Democrats surges after Ketanji Brown gets the nomination. Oh, just black voter enthusiasm surges. Well, how the hell do you measure that? Because you can't have an election to measure it against. Oh, well, we did some polling, you see. I told you about them folk for Morning Consult, by the way. Okay, so Ketanji Brown made it to the Supreme Court. There was never really any threat that she wouldn't. Democrats got the majority, so that being the case, of course, they were going to confirm her. She did absolutely nothing that was going to threaten or even make nervous the white supremacists, so that being the case, there was nothing to be won by her being on the Supreme Court and nothing to be lost if she didn't make it. But there was no chance she wasn't going to make it. She's a cog in the machine and everyone knows it. Okay, so she's on the Supreme Court now. What's supposed to change for black people? She gives a self-serving speech calling herself the hope of the slave. Well, I don't know of any slaves who were hoping for a zaddy worshiper to be making policy for them. I can't remember the slaves who wanted that. I can think of a few bedbucks and Uncle Toms and Aunt Tamikas who wanted that, but no slaves who actually had any integrity. But this is the steady drumbeat that we're going to be subjected to by the white media for the next 7 months or so we got to make sure that we stay on top of our game. We got to make sure that we don't allow these lies and all of this disinformation and all of this diversion to be going unanswered. So you're going to be hearing a lot of this. The lies from the white media are that black people's biggest concerns are prison reform and or voting rights legislation. Well, they're wrong on both counts. The vast majority of black people are not prisoners, nor are we in trouble with the law. When I vote, my pocketbook is front of mind. That comes first. That takes up the greatest amount of my mind share because that's what's most important to me. Prison reform wouldn't crack the top 30 for me. Now, on the other hand, if you were talking about punishing the police, now that's different. That ranks far higher. Breaking the enforcement arm of white supremacy, that's in the top 5. But as far as this whole thing about, well, black people are only concerned about, the fact that they just can't stay out of prison. All these Negroes, their only issue is jail. That's how those people are. That's white media propaganda. And as for voting rights reform, as I've said and will continue to say, if black people really want to vote, I mean for real want to vote, as we showed in Wisconsin and Georgia and Michigan and Florida, these white supremacist inbreds can't stop us, not if we actually want to vote. You see, that's part of the little secret that black folks don't talk about very much. Oh, we're able to get things done if we really want to. Black folks will be the main ones telling you about all the money they ain't got. That is until there's something they want to buy, then all of a sudden they're able to find the money. And the same thing happens to go for forcing our interest into the political arena. We're able to get things done when we want to. Now, are the Republicans trying to throw stumbling blocks and roadblocks in the path of black voters? Of course they are, but there's nothing new about that. They've been doing that for decades. Ever since the consent decree in 1984, Democrats have had nearly 40 years to protect black voting rights against Republicans' attempts to try to block us from voting. They've had that ever since the 80s at least. And that was when they were still the overwhelming majority in the House and the Senate, and yet in 4 decades, the Democrats haven't done diddly squat on that front. But now, all of a sudden, we've begun making tangibles a prerequisite for the black vote. We've forced it into the political discourse. We've made it an issue that they just can't get around, and they're not going to talk their way around the issue. And now, all of a sudden, we're told that there's some existential crisis going on, and that it is the duty of black people to ignore our own interest, and let's put aside all of this petty stuff that we've been talking about in terms of what we're supposed to get, and let's just make sure we keep those Democrats in power. Because of all the good they've done for us all these years. We got to keep them in power because things will be worse under the Republicans. Oh, bad as the Democrats are, they're not perfect, but it'd be worse under the Republicans. What would the Republicans be doing? Allowing black people to get gunned down in the streets? Ignoring our interests? They would be supercharging the enforcement arm of white supremacy, giving them tens of millions of dollars? Would the Democrats be telling lies to black people about what our interests are and just wholesale ignoring us in favor of everybody else and then telling hate criminals they can go ahead and attack black people with impunity? Is that what the Republicans will be doing? Because that's what I see the Democrats doing. The bastards are always trying to prioritize everyone and everything over us and always trying to do some political Jedi mind trick on us, telling us that our interests are not what we keep saying they are. Well, we know you guys keep talking about money and what you're supposed to be getting and that you guys are here for your check. But you know what? Your real concern is whether or not you're able to vote. That's your big concern, buddy. Hell, the situation's so desperate to try to get us on board with the clown car going nowhere that you got the idiots over at Blavaty who are saying that home care is a way for the Democrats to show black women that their votes count. This is more of that asinine attempts at gender warring. What they see is black people are asking too many questions, so they got to divide and conquer, get black people to break themselves up into arguing, warring camps. And then hopefully all of this fervor to be pushing black people's interests is going to get broken up. It's going to be turned into, well, there's no black interest. There's black women's interest. There's black LGBT interests. There's black intersectionalist interests, but no black interests. So you got the clowns over at Blavaty who are doing their white paymasters bidding, or their aspiring white paymasters. Most of them ain't got no doggone white media job, but they desperately wish they could get one. And they're saying that home care, that's a way that Democrats can show black women that their votes count. First of all, the Democrats control the White House and both houses of Congress. Black people put them there. Not just black women, by the way, but since this is the divestment shea butter bootlick crowd over at Blavaty, we'll go ahead and give them that one. We'll go ahead and say that black women alone put the Democrats in charge all by themselves and nobody else. That being the case, how pathetic is it that the very people who put the Democrats in charge are now having to beg those Democrats to prove that their vote wasn't for nothing? I mean, we're a little bit overdue for the bootlick divestment shea butter crowd to be misusing Malcolm X's quote about black women are the mule of the world. Well, that being the case, then Blavaty and friends are showing exactly who it is who's riding black women's backs. It's these Democrats. And you got Blavaty trying to give you excuses to put more weight on there. The fact that you have to beg the Democrats to do something after you put them in office, that means your vote didn't count. It didn't mean anything. Because you don't see Asians having to do begging like this. And not surprisingly, Blavaty's headline says black women. The first two paragraphs say black women repeatedly, and then the third paragraph switches it to black, Hispanic, Asian, Pacific Islanders, indigenous, and even immigrants. By the way, immigrants includes all of those white Ukrainians, many of them racist, who Joe Biden wants to bring in here. Those are immigrants too, by the way. And I'm sure the people over there at Blavaty, the divestors, they're sitting there going, well, there's got to be some zaddies in there somewhere. I want me an Ivan zaddy. So Blavaty is pushing yet another bait and switch piece. They start off talking about black women and then they switch it to everybody else. By the way, this doesn't happen with anyone else. Anyone else's interest, it stays on them. It starts with them, stays with them, and ends with them. They never shoehorn black people in there. Black people aren't even part of the discussion. And speaking of other groups, what are Democrats doing for these other groups? Well, we already know you got Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York State. She set up a hotline specifically to report hate crimes against Asians. And as I told you last week, the new DA of Manhattan, Alvin Bragg, on the same day that he allows the career hate criminal Mia Ponsetto to get away with assaulting a black child with no prison time whatsoever and nothing that's going to actually harm her in any way, the very same day he announces that he's going to bolster his office's hate crimes unit so they could go after hate crimes against Asians. So as far as hate crimes against black people go, well, we're letting those people go. We don't want the criminal justice system has too many people being incarcerated. Okay, what about hate crimes against Asians? God dang it, we got to drop the hammer on them. We aren't getting tough enough. We got to get tougher with these guys. We need more people. This is a priority. Now, what should the response of a constituency, of a people, be to repeated displays of disrespect like this? To repeated political hostility like this? Blavaty and the same idiots pretending to voice black people's concerns, they're going to be the very ones saying vote blue no matter who in a few months. Black interests be damned. Oh, they'll be the ones saying all the stuff the Democrats have done, like what? Well, there's more black women on the ballot than ever before. But what are they going to be doing for black people? Have they said what they're going to be doing for black people? No, this is just social climbing for themselves. Just like Mayor London Breed out there in San Francisco. Just like Ketanji Brown, these are social climbers. Trick us into living vicariously through a bunch of bootlicks and sellouts and a bunch of doggone suck-ups. And these are supposed to be the people that we live vicariously through. Oh, they're going to be elevating a small, very small handful of cherry-picked Negroes, and this is supposed to be people who we aspire to in a system that's already made it very clear nobody is going to be allowed to have anything, and these idiots, what few crumbs they get will only be what white supremacy allows them to have. Well, we're not going to be living vicariously. We're going to be living for real. This is a test of our resolve, what's going on here. Because if the problem was really as big as the Democrats say, if there really is an existential crisis for democracy going on, if the ability of the United States to be a free nation for who, I don't know, definitely not for black people, but if democracy really hangs by a thread, then it seems to me that it should be very easy for the Democrats to step up with our reparations, for them to step up with our tangibles, policies specifically for us. To hell with funding the police, you need to be funding the black community. Punish the police and everything else we've demanded. Instead, what's happening is we're hearing about how black people need to look past all of their interests, and you need to look past all the things the Democrats haven't done and just vote for them anyway. Because the Republicans would be even worse. Black people have given the Democrats control of the doggone government totally, just given them complete control of the government. What the hell else can black people do for them? This is not a matter of what black people can do for them. It's a matter of distract us. Get us focusing simply on doing for them so that we never actually get to the part where they're supposed to do anything for us. The problem is not black people having access to the polls. The problem is and has always been, what are black people going to get for our vote? And you notice how that's never the headline? Because that's the entire point. We're never supposed to get to the part where we're actually asserting our interests and getting what's ours. We're never actually supposed to get to that point. We're supposed to instead run around in rhetorical circles like a dog chasing its own tail. The white media narrative is instead about completely irrelevant nonsense about how enthusiastically black people allegedly are to support Biden's nominee for the Supreme Court. Even though we're not going to get anything out of it. But it's going to be about representation, and little black girls can see themselves on the Supreme Court. Let me tell you something. Black males for the last 35 years have seen Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. Please tell me, how inspiring is that? I don't really care what color the person is on the Supreme Court or in the legislature as long as they do my bidding. See, that's the problem. The problem is that these punk politicians and these nominees of any color aren't doing what we tell them to do. That's the problem. We don't go along with cosmetics. We're not impressed by cosmetics. We're not children. And we're not dumb. Oh, we want Biden's voting legislation to pass. Why? So he can continue to tell us all the stuff he's not going to do for us? Oh, there's never anything about black people are less likely to vote because we're not getting our tangibles. Notice how that's never the headline, though it should be. Marquette University has been conducting an ongoing rolling poll regarding the trending of particular groups as it relates to Joe Biden. And for about the last 8 months or so, they've been keeping track of what all has been going on with the black community, of course. And according to their polling data, which is as recent as just last month, they've been tracking that black disapproval of Joe Biden has only been growing over the course of the last 8 months. July of last year, they were saying that 10% of black voters disapproved of Biden. Today, it's 43%. 88% approved of him last summer. Now it's down to 56%. That, of course, is a far more accurate picture of what the black community actually believes than what the white media narrative has been. In fact, the white media hasn't been really saying, especially with the agenda-setting media, the big networks, the NBCs and the New York Times and such, they've been doing everything they can not to be actually doing polling like that, because it goes against the narrative of black people need to be supporting, propping up one of these political parties, because as long as you're voting, you're not in revolt. That's the purpose that voting serves for a subjugated people. You're so busy trying to figure out what do-nothing puppet you're going to put into office, and you never get around to the part where you're supposed to actually get something from the puppet. You just have arguments about which puppet you want to put in office. The Los Angeles Times did a piece a few days ago about what does America think of Kamala Harris. Well, you wouldn't want to know what I think of her, but nonetheless, part of that piece was that they cited a poll by YouGov, and what these guys did was they actually looked at what black people thought of Kamala Harris over the course of the last 3 years. And what was particularly interesting to me was the trending of black people who either had an unfavorable view of Kamala Harris or who just allegedly didn't know what they thought about her. Now, back in January 2019, you had something like 31.9%, let's just say 32% of black people who said that they didn't know what they thought about Kamala Harris. January 2019, that was when Kamala Harris gave her announcement that she was going to be trying to throw her Burger King crown into the ring to run for president. That's what was going on in January 2019. She announced her plan to run and failed to get the presidency. But then after that, Joe Biden made her his running mate, and that's when the undecideds in the black community, according to YouGov America anyway, began to go down. Less and less people, black people, were saying that they didn't know what they thought about her, and then by the time you get to the election, her undecideds are at an all-time low of 3.2%. That's the lowest number that she had according to YouGov America, and that also goes for the unfavorable numbers for her. That was down to 9.1%. Her favorable rating was at the highest it had ever been, 87.6. This was right after the 2020 election. So, of course, this was going to be the honeymoon period. She was never going to have it this good before, and clearly never going to have it this good since, because, of course, the numbers just basically flatlined after that. 3 years ago, 46.5% of black people had an unfavorable or an undecided view of Kamala Harris, and now here we are, 3 years later. And according to YouGov America, and this is a poll cited by the Los Angeles Times, so I'll let you decide what that's worth. They're saying that the undecideds and unfavorables in the black community now are at 35.1%. So this is supposed to be basically the best kind of polling. This is certainly the most charitable that they can get. To say that Kamala Harris, why only 1 out of 3 black people have an unfavorable view of her. She's not supposed to have any black folks having an unfavorable view of her. So this is the most rose-colored glasses view of Kamala Harris that the white media could come up with. Best they could say is, well, only 1 out of 3 black people wouldn't vote for her. And when you look at their graph, you see that number only trends downward. It's not recovering, just going sloping straightly downward. How much worse are things going to be for her 2 years from now? And this is what the white media trying to put out the most rosy-colored view that they can of Kamala Harris and her political fortunes with the black community. This is what they're trying to prop up. This is what they're trying to use as good news for her. But of course, as you would expect, there's absolutely no analyses or attempts to explain why that is. Just kind of like, maybe she needs better PR. The Democrats are trying to do a political Jedi mind trick. They want to list the things that they want us to do and then to tell us that we want to do them. This is an old white media playbook. Before the new black media came along and began to gather everyone together and to aggregate our numbers, the white media would run headlines like this saying that black people want XYZ. And then they'd have some shill like Mark Lamont shill or Charles Blow or Roly-Poly or whomever, and they would list some things that some white Democrats want. And because we weren't able to connect to each other on a large scale, and we weren't able to talk to each other in significant numbers, we were just simply left to think, well, there must be something to it. Well, no, usually what would happen is we would start complaining and saying, how come there are so many black people who are so stupid for wanting all of these irrelevant things? We thought that we were in a bubble. It was just us or just the people in our immediate area. None of us realize that most black people felt the same way that we do. See, when your oppressor is able to saturate the city or the country with propaganda faster than you can propagate the truth, that makes you feel like you're in the minority. So no, black people are not enthused because of Ketanji Brown getting on the Supreme Court. They're talking about their hand-picked safe Negroes. That's what they're talking about. Voting rights doesn't mean anything when you have do-nothing Democratic shills on the ballot whose priorities are bathrooms for all genders, open borders, and funding the police. What are we supposed to be voting for? Apparently, nothing. See, this article that the Insider posted was basically a paid advertisement for a couple of those sock puppet black organizations. You know, the groups that dark white money, pale money funds, organizations like Black Voters Matter and Democracy in Color. You got these white organizations who set up one of these 501c3s, and they'll have a couple of front Negroes who claim, we're the leaders of this group. Yeah, don't pay any attention to the white folks behind them who are putting all the money into it. So this is a puff piece in which black Democratic shills try to tell us that our most important priority is getting as many Democrats of any color into office as possible. And we don't need to have any demands, except for home care. And we need to have the right to vote for Democrats and get nothing from them. Okay, well, if our most important priority is voting Democrats into office, what, pray tell, is the Democrats' most important priority? Everything except black people. But the Democrats are getting nervous, and they should be. Their attempts to try to put together some Frankenstein monster of a voting coalition without black people, or at least one that black people will not be a threat to, well, that's turning out to be more sizzle than steak. It ain't exactly working out as smoothly as they hoped. Hispanics are trending to the Republicans. No surprise, since they identify as white, most of them, and as we've seen in the Latin American countries that they immigrated from, they want to identify as part of the oppressor class. All you got to do is look at the leaders of these white supremacist extremist groups. Enrique Tarrio, leader of the Proud Boys. Stuart Rhodes, founder and leader of the Oath Keepers. His mother is a mestizo Mexican immigrant. Nick Fuentes, notorious white supremacist organizer. And, of course, Ron DeSantis, the imperial grand wizard of the People's Clavern of Florida. Hispanics went for Ted Cruz over Beto O'Rourke 4 years ago, and you notice that the white media didn't lecture them about it. The white media didn't say, what's wrong with Hispanics? Why the world would they do that? What's wrong with them? They didn't do any of that browbeating and haranguing of them. There was no verbal chastising of the Hispanic vote breaking for Ted Cruz. And the same thing goes for white women. Whenever it comes time to talk about the 2020 election, people say, well, you know, there were some black men who voted for Donald Trump, not as many as white women who voted for Donald Trump. Because apparently grabbing women by their genitals didn't bother them. All the women who accused Donald Trump of sexual harassment and assault didn't bother white women. All the race baiting didn't bother white women, but there's no lecturing for them. It's only for the black community. That's who they do the lecturing with. That's who they wag the finger at. That's who they decide they're going to bring in to verbally chastise. See, with Hispanics, the dialogue is always, well, what can Democrats do to appeal to the Hispanic vote? What can they do to make Hispanic voters happy? Why would Hispanic voters? We got to find, how do we appease them? With the black community, on the other hand, have black people forgotten about all the people who died? And what would Dr. King say? And look, is this abandonment of black people's own history? That's what the doggone dialogue is. Shaming tactics, verbal chastisement. And we ain't having it. So why is this happening? It's because it's obvious. These Democratic operatives are trying to BS their way past us. They're trying to bluff their way past us by dumping a bunch of empty gestures and meaningless slogans and empty rhetoric and fear-mongering about a Republican threat that they've done absolutely nothing to protect us from. They're going to sit here and throw this word salad at us and see if they can bluff their way past us with all of this verbal vomit. They're going back to the old black is a dirty word political strategy. That's what's going on. They're telling us that for them to even mention us, why, that's political suicide. We can't mention you. That's unpopular. Nobody likes you people, so that's the reason why we can't mention you. So you better just be glad with anything we do for you because everybody hates you. They never say that to anyone else. They're trying to get us to back down by telling us that anything that we want, why you're asking too much. You're asking us to do too much. We need to understand that we're an undeserving constituency. That's the message. You Negroes don't really deserve anything. Why, we're going out of our way just to be seen with you. That's too much to expect us to actually do anything for you. Haven't we taken enough risk for you niggers? They're trying to get us to internalize self-loathing like the black baby boomers did. That way we won't get mad and they won't do anything for us. Well, if they refuse to tell us what they're going to do for us, then I'll be damned if I'm going to lift a finger or pull a lever or push a button for them. As Cop Mala said, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to do something that's only going to benefit Kamala Harris. No! Kamala Harris said she wasn't going to do anything that only benefits black people, and then she and Biden immediately passed legislation for the LGBT community, for Asians, Native Americans, Latinos. They've even done it for doggone non-citizens, the Ukrainians. They made it a point to emphasize how all these other groups, even non-Americans, have needs specifically for themselves, and they gotta look after those needs, and they have to attend to those needs and respond to those needs. They have to address their needs. But with black people, these bastards are bold telling us what they're not gonna do, and how we better not ask. And then they got the nerve to send out their bootlicking minions to say, well, this is why we have to vote for these guys, because the Republicans will be even worse. Oh, you mean the Republicans will sit there and watch black people getting gunned down the streets? They'll watch black people being thrown out in the streets. I told you about black women and mass evictions. They'll be doing everything that they can to see the thugs in blue armed to the teeth, killing black people with impunity. And then afterwards, the Republicans will say, you think we're going to do something that only benefits black people? No! You mean the Republicans will do something like that? Is that what we should be afraid of? Meanwhile, the Democrats are using COVID money as a front to float tens of millions of dollars to the thugs in blue. And they never talk about how unpopular the police are. The polls show how unpopular the police are. Even with all the phony hysteria about crime, nobody's asking just how popular are the police? Are the police popular? Do anybody look at the police as the solution? See, the Democrats don't tell the police unions, we can't do anything for you. You guys are as popular as syphilis. We can't do anything. We can't be seen with you. Now, black voters far outnumber the thugs and blues voters. I mean, it's not even a question. So why would anyone prioritize a tiny, inconsequential gang of street criminals over their own political base? Here's a better question. Why should black people prioritize Democrats at all? So as far as I'm concerned, I'm glad that these idiots are hiding their heads in the sand and they're desperately hoping that the tidal wave that's going to be sweeping them out of power isn't going to be coming along, because as black people, we got to put our feet down. We got to make sure we put our foot down firmly. And all of these other groups who are depending on Democrats to do anything for them, they got to understand. Black people have been put at the back of the line for the longest time. And we're the only reason that this country exists. We're the ones who built this country. Whatever goodies or whatever prosperity they're hoping to have is because black people provided it. And that being the case, black people are getting put at the front of the line, and we're going to be unapologetic about it. Because we're done with the garbage about how you're going to be scaring black people to the polls. Oh, these Republicans, these evil Republicans, seeming no different than the evil Democrats. You're not going to sit here and act like, well, as long as I don't call you nigger, you should put up with anything that I do or don't do for you. No, that ain't how the game is played. This is business. And that being the case, if you refuse to do business, then there will be no business. But what we're not going to be doing is continuing to make excuses for why we should be ignored and why we have to overlook that and why there's the greater good and we got to make sure these Republicans, they gonna be mean now. Forget all that. Democrats have had every chance there is to prove that they would protect black people, that they would protect our interest and promote our interest. They've had decades to do so. And we get less than an IOU. We don't even get an IOU. What we get is, well, we can't do that and that's just the way it is. What about reparations? That's not feasible. Well, what about tangibles for us? You think I'm going to do something that only benefits black people? No. Well, we need that check, Elizabeth Warren. What check? Check for what? Yeah, undeserving Negro. You guys are undeserving. You're unpopular. Why? We can't do anything for you. We just can't. Okay, fine then. Democrats have made it abundantly clear that there's no reason that they should do anything for black people. And we're telling the bastards that there's no excuse for why we should do anything for them. Good night, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Isaac, Angela Maynor, Lo Have Mercy, Antonio Daniels, and Bert. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.